So, Christian Finnsgård from SSPA in Göteborg. We all have our research background that have been involved in these projects from Chalmers. And SSPA is a small, it's a former state-owned research institute that since the last 30 years has been owned by the foundation that owns Chalmers University of Technology as well. But we are acting as an independent research institute. But if you like to contact our commercial side, give me a call, because we also do the hydrodynamic testing as one of the leading hydrodynamic test facilities in the world. So we can assist with that as well. But today we'll talk about research, and that's what I work with. And the main topic, if you see these, is going to be demonstrators and urban and short sea shipping. But mainly on demonstrators is what I will talk about today. So demonstrators in general, and then I will take two separate cases where we have been using demonstrators. So it's going to be in the very Scandinavian context of närsjöfart i Öresund, Kattegatt and Skagerrak. It's an interreg project with the requirement that we speak in the Scandinavian languages. But I will try to translate it as good as possible. It's going to be in the next slide as well. So I'll intrigue you for a moment there. Then we'll talk about urban waterway transports in a project from a project called Density. And then I'll summarize up the two different. And in these projects, we've planned quite a few demonstrators. I'll get back to why in a while, but we have been looking at supplying a shopping center with short sea shipping. We're looking at goods and waste transportation within the urban context. And how about using inland waterways along coasts? In Sweden, and I think also in Denmark and in Norway, there has not been an inland waterway directive employed. So quite special considerations, and we have somewhat different coasts, and could it be possible to use the inland? We have an archipelago along the Swedish west coast, or at least along a certain parts of the Swedish archipelago, west coast. So it might be possible to use the inland waterway directives along that coast. So we will, because the authorities in Sweden are somewhat slow in implementing this directive, we'll start. So we'll do a demonstrator and see how it works. Container transports on inland waterways, that's a novelty, isn't it? If you're from continental Europe, there has not been tried before, has it? Well, in Sweden it hasn't. Remarkable. So, but then once again, when there is no inland waterway directive, how do you do? Well, of course, it hasn't been done yet. So we'll kickstart it and see what can be done. But let's talk about nuts. So now it's Scandinavian again. So we shall develop the sea route to be an attractive, green, safe, and sustainable link for goods flow between and within Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. Very simple. How hard can it be? So let's skip that and look into one of the cases within this project. So we have this shopping center located in Uddevalla, if you know it, along the route E6 that comes into Sweden from Trelleborg and go up along the coast. And basically in the middle between Göteborg and Oslo, there is Uddevalla, and the Norwegians have built a huge shopping center, among the biggest in Sweden by now in annual turnover. Now they've even attracted IKEA, for instance. So it's a big shopping center. Almost all customers come by car. But it's located close to E6, the E6. It's located very close to a harbor, Uddevalla harbor, that since the 80s have had little utilization. It's fully functional, fully working, but it has plenty of capacity. The automotive factory is now closed, so it doesn't have those outbound flows that they had for some instances before. So plenty of capacity around, very close. So, and of course, the actors involved here, they have plenty of capacity and would love to take care of the flows to this shopping center. But you have the storage facilities of those involved in the flows and not sufficient volumes for shipping. Well, do you? Actually, we'll get back to that about the volumes that you need inside a city. It's not only 18,000 containers like in the Maersk cases we've heard about here today earlier. But there is a wrong spelling on frequency. So there is the delivery frequency. Well, a shopping center once a week is not a very good frequency for deliveries to a shopping center. And that's not our demonstrator down there. But so will this actually work? Well, guessing from this picture that has the size of these dots corresponds to the number of pallets for the inbound flow to this shopping center. So even if it's situated on the road, right where the flow from the continent comes, the goods flow doesn't take this way. So it goes into the regular supply chains of the stores located in the shopping center. And thereby it's totally impossible to use short sea shipping for these flows. And you can see that there is a poor connectivity to even inland waterways from these areas. It's not going to be possible. So to be able to supply these shopping centers along this coast, you have to redesign the entire supply chains, and the involved actors won't do that. So, and even if this shopping center has probably the second best possibility among the shopping centers along the Swedish west coast, there is actually one even further up north that has its own Ro-Ro terminal in Nordby. That's the shopping center in the very north before the border to Norway. It has its own Ro-Ro key. So it could actually be even better to supply it without going on a public road before you get to the shopping center. So maybe that could be even better. But no, it's not going to work the way the supply chains are supplied today. So that turned out to be a non-demonstrator. It's not even a point in doing it. It's going to fail. So, but let's look at the urban waterway transport instead. Here is an area where we think there is a great potential. And of course, in our cities, road transport causes negative environmental impact. Trying to go through central Copenhagen, for instance, is not uncomplicated, at least. We have the densification of cities. In Göteborg, and if you have been to Göteborg, it's not the biggest city in the world, I can promise you. There are worse cities. But in Göteborg, the trend is you have to make it denser. You have to make it more förtätning. So you have, along the water in central Gothenburg, you have plans for 25,000 apartments and 45,000 workplaces in direct connection with the river. And of course, there is very little utilization of the urban waterways right next to this. I will show you in a minute. So this is very interesting possibilities, because what we actually can do in this situation is we can design the system because this is not yet built. So we have the opportunity right now. We don't have to make a solution afterwards. We can do it from the beginning. So, and this is several of the keys located here. You will have all these buildings with residential areas and office spaces. And as you can see, it's plenty of possibilities to put in. This is actually the old DFDS terminal in Gothenburg, where you have the Ro-Ro terminal. So we will perform a demonstration to look on how we could supply goods, and that is in cooperation with Schenker and DOL, their supply of goods for small packages deliveries to these areas, and look at the possibilities to transport waste away from this area. And we'll look on the feasibility in economical, technical, and environmental aspects. And of course, the aim is to see, is it actually going to work, or could it work, or will it work? The trouble is that On the other side of this, you have the main route to the port of Göteborg, and you have the main two railway lines. If you don't know, about 50% of the goods coming into Port of Gothenburg goes out by rail. You have that railway going, well, a bit further than where we stand here, but very close, and a few of the big, most heavily trafficked roads in Göteborg. And that's where you put a lot of people living and working without communications. So putting in more flow of goods here is not a good idea. But they've made the decision, people are going to work and live here. The end of the story. So let's see how that works out. So interesting challenges. So we'll do a single case study. Performing and evaluating the demonstration gives us as researcher plenty of opportunities for interesting papers here. So we'll see. Of course, this is not new. Delivering stuff by boats have been around since not the beginning of time, but for a long time. However, doing it in the modern context, not as common. But of course, we have municipal waste in London, for instance. We have Franpix distribution by barge to grocery stores in France. And in Amsterdam, of course, beer, famous cases. So there are elements of this already. So there is a lot of choices before you make a demonstrator like this. For instance, the city plans are not set yet. It's going to take a long time to build this. This is not Shanghai. This will take a while. And it's not only the municipalities that wants to make use of the waterways. There are interested actors here, like, for instance, boat builders. And the local touring company, they like to distribute goods with their ships because there are not enough of our tourists that go around in these boats. You'll see why this boat is attractive in quite a while here. I'll show you. You can see that it's very low. We blame it on the Dutch. They built too many bridges in Göteborg, but they're very low. Interesting challenges. So there is a reason why they're so low. Of course, there is plenty of potential ships and barges to take deliveries within cities. And you have barges with large capacity, can be used for storage, can be docked and just dropped off and used for storage. For instance, for building materials, for removal of, for instance, stone and concrete. Very good, interesting. And flexible when it comes to loading. You can actually basically build it without so much cost. Then you have ro-ro ships, of course, easy loading. But a lot of personnel, could be quite costly to build. You have container ships, of course, standardized. We love standardized things. Very good. Loading units fits with the rest of supply chains. No need to adapt them. It just click and it works. Large capacity, you can take as much as you like, or as you saw in the other picture, you can take one container. A bit tricky, but possible. Then you have small boats, speed and flexibility, but of course economies of scale are out of the window. So, but still interesting to look at. But then you have also one thing when you look into the entire supply chain. You have carriers or packaging, or the different levels of packaging, where you need to put the goods in stuff. If you're not using bulk carriage, for instance, then you can just put it there. But in the other cases, when it comes to goods that are used for consumption or to companies that use it in their supply chain, you have packaging. And you have containers, and you have open-ended containers, and plenty. There is a flora of opportunities what you can use to ship goods in. And then you have loading equipment. Such fun for an engineer to work with this. And so expensive it can be. So we'll see what happens. Plenty of opportunities. So let's look into this case. Here, down here, you have the Free Harbor, or Frihamnen. For those who know, DFD terminal, where they loaded the ships. Right across the harbor here, you have the Opera House. So it's smack in the city center. This is where everything is going to be built. And up here along the river Göta Älv, you have the DHL terminal. Recently moved there because they weren't allowed to be in the city center anymore. Interestingly enough, they have a very big harbor facility along the bridge with quays that are perfectly fine to use. Everything is in fully operational order, could be used for big ships today. You have Schenker, who has a terminal here. They made a worse deal when they moved their facility, so they only have gravel along the river, so they can't dock ships yet. They have very nice personnel for the staff to have lunch right along the river, but they have no keys. So we'll see. It's going to be possible to load smaller ships, but and this is not far, so this is where they handle their goods today, and both their facilities have the back of their buildings to the river. So it's to supply the goods here. This is the most busiest place for traffic in Gothenburg. If you pass here, you're going to get stuck almost any day of the hour or any hour of the day. Then there is this interesting possibility. So what about removing waste from this? So waste in Gothenburg is handled you have to make gas from it, and you have to use it for heating. And so you have this facility here that takes care of basically a lot of waste materials from the rest of the western Sweden. And of course, you can see the famous Säveån. So it's a very small, it's an å. It's slightly less big than a river, but it's a functioning waterway. It's still functioning. The Swedish Maritime Administration has a paper chart that goes to that crossing or that bridge. So 2 of the 21 crossings they've mapped. Then there's stop and nobody knows what's inside. So that's a challenge for a demonstrator. Is this going to be possible at all? So we've selected a small barge that could actually transport these both waste, as in these waste containers. That is the kind that are actually used today for waste disposal in Göteborg. It also has, I'll show you here, the possibilities for 6 pallets. For goods delivered on pallets, they can either put them there and have 2 garbage disposal, or 3 if they put the crane on top here. This is all, as you saw, it's a functioning barge. It's called Helan, very funny in Swedish, if you ever heard the Swedish snapsvisa, so it's very good. It's going to function very well in Göteborg. So these are functioning today, and 6 pallets and up to 3 waste disposal. This is one of our master thesis worker, Maximilian, out and doing visual inspection of, this is Schenker. So not so good for loading ships. There is room for improvement. This is the waste disposal area. So here you have the biggest site for waste disposal and burning and sorting of waste in Sweden. And here you have this private shipyard with a fully functioning quay, but who owns it, who owns the land? It actually turns out that it's a municipality that owns the land, but you have this shipyard for private ships or leisure boats. Interesting for the future. This is not planned for working along this beautiful Säveån and for any goods or waste disposal. So you have to go out and look at the required draft, the air draft, the breadth of the fairway here, or the river. So this is the smallest boat I could find in my own shipyard. So we took that and went out, and turned out that these 21 bridges, there are some challenges there. So the lowest one turns out at the air draft, the lowest is 2.2 meters. I can stand in the boat, but you don't drive too fast approaching those. It's 10 meters wide, and at some point you have a draft of 2 meters that you can utilize. So these barges that you saw, it's possible to use them. It's going to be tight, but it's going to be possible. And you have to travel up here, and you have some famous Swedish plants like SKF, for instance, have their main office and factories here. You have a current of 1 to 3 knots in this small river. Challenging. And you have everything from highways to trams to railroad. Everything will pass over you. And you'll go alongside the main railroad from between Göteborg and Stockholm, for instance. So, will this actually work? Well, you have this is interesting here. You have the Panamax definitions, but what about a city max for a barge? What will be the dimensioning factors here when you have a barge or a ship that is classified for work in cities? How long can they be? How much goods can they move? How much waste can they move? How about propulsion, electricity, biofuels, loading equipment, noise levels? These are highly relevant things when you talk about putting ships into the urban context where you build new apartments for people to live in. And looking at what to measure here when we use these demonstrators. This demonstrator will be performed in real with live goods and live waste, will be performed during the spring here. And we have a few success factors. You have environmental factors. You have sustainable energy for propulsion, of course, low emissions in every aspect, low cost for society. And actually one thing that turns out to be very important, and that is surprising to us how these areas look today, low visual intrusion. We thought that Göteborg is a former port, former shipbuilding, so of course ships should be a good thing to see. No, the less they're visible, the better, apparently. You have on-time delivery, responsive, quick transportation time. Will it take longer time to deliver these goods with this small ship from the terminals to the actual customers? We don't know. We'll see. It's suspected that it actually won't take longer. It might be more flexible. We'll see. Low transshipment time. Well, is it going to be faster to actually handle it with the boats and barges than on the trucks? Because the downside for the trucks here is that they can't use the vehicles that they want. They have to reload it, and there is definitely higher utilization of the vehicles for the trucks going in and out of this terminal. So it might be faster to use it by, even that it has to go by the keys. Higher predictability. Next day delivery has to be fully functioning here. It can't wait. Our goods can't wait. And service level, it has to be easy on the receiving end for the customer. You have in logistics the last mile problem. This is very much the last mile problem. It has to be taken care of. It has to be the meeting, the delivery agreements, and quality. So if it rains one day, or snow, or ice, this has to be taken into consideration. We'll probably perform this demonstration in April or May. It's probably going to be sunny. But we've had some sunshine today. It wasn't very sunny when I left Göteborg this morning. So we'll see. So we have to analyze the collected data. We have to make additional economic and environmental calculations and look at the drivers and barriers. And these are very substantial issues here with the drivers and barriers. So you have the economic factors. You have operational factors. I won't go into this now, but these are some serious issues that had already during the design of the demonstrator have come up. And of course you have this. Don't go here. These keys have not been used for, as I said, delivery in urban areas is not new, but it was a long time since it actually was used. So you end up with this. There is no one who knows how these areas in the city actually work now, because it was a long time since these were used. You have a behavioral change in the way that goods are transported. That's tricky. So, and it's the same thing as with transportation and transporting a container. It can't be more expensive, then nobody will use it. Simple as that. Unless we get into policy and regulations. I had, for EU projects, I was on another conference last week who talked about city distribution projects. This is city distribution, it's just utilizing water instead. So they had this, that the EU had spent money in 70 projects looking into city distribution. Only 2 have survived after the project ended. And that was the 2 that enforced laws and regulations. That was the only 2 that survived. So it's possibly that this will fall into that. unless you have some change in policy and regulation. And then we look into inland waterways. What's inland waterways? Oh, regulations, interesting. Might be some collaboration here. So this is one thing. And then, of course, in Göteborg, we like to build low bridges. And from a logistical point of view, that's very interesting. So you actually favor one flow that you say, it's catastrophe with the traffic. The buses and the cars has to get forward, and the trucks. And then you realize, well, if you build that bridge, the ships won't get through. Oh, didn't think of that. So very interesting area.
You can have submarines.
Well, from the logistic perspective, what about a tunnel? Well, but a tunnel actually, it turns out it consumes more space going up and down again. So, and then you have this issue, do you want to have roads or tunnels or, well, very interesting discussions. So you have the drivers, of course, because if you utilize these rivers here, and this is a typical day where you have congestion on the road, and look how many ships there are here. It's fully jammed. So, and of course, this area is actually much larger than the actual roads that are just beside it that are congested. So you have the lower congestion, you have lower noise, you have less road accident, you have less pollution, less visual intrusion if you utilize the urban waterways. And political incentives, financial aid, coverage of infrastructure costs. The waterways are an extremely cheap infrastructure. That's very attractive to politicians. This is cheap, it's already there. We don't have to build anything. Nice. And of course you have the ban of heavy traffic from cities. It will come more. Göteborg, it was the 5th or 6th in Europe to have congestion tax. So we're used to that by now, so everybody's forgotten the effects already, I guess. But still, it's there. You have the low emissions zones. This will help in this. So the main conclusion so far, there are many interested actors in this. They are really interested in this. You have to plan for waterway transport before building areas. We have to define the new ship barge types for urban waterway transport, the City Max or CVO Max that we discussed for, and find criteria for this because, of course, a key to a functioning flow is standardization so that you can move or use intermodality for these ships or boats. And there are plenty of drivers and barriers towards urban waterway transport. So this is from the density projects. And if we're summarizing on the demonstrators, so we have a few experiences so far, and we'll write plenty of papers on this because this is a good area. So it's a quick way of generating focus on an issue. We're going to do in demonstrators. Do you want to be along? And pretty much everyone will say, yeah, cool, let's be in on this. Very good for financiers. So it's a quick way of generating results. Can be applied for collaboration projects with industry and especially the public authorities and communities. They're in on this. They want to be along. And for research, of course, we can develop these results into our scientific context. So we'll be working with this. And demonstrators can be an attractive way to study innovative green waterway transport solution. There is the long title again. But it actually turns out that in this context, it actually works using demonstrators. So it's been a way forward for us. So, thank you.
Anyone has questions? David?
So the driver for using the waterways, is it because you use less energy going by boat or to avoid congestion?
Either. It's going to be different for different flows. Yeah. But in these cases, congestion is a very important issue. But on the other hand, they're designing these new building projects. They're designing it without the possibility to supply it by trucks. Yeah. So then they have to find other solutions. So they're not going the regulating way. They're building the infrastructure so small or tight that you can't use a truck. So you have to find another solution. So then, of course, you put in the low emissions and that other stuff because,
But
yeah.
if your city max is 2 meters on each size, you will not be able to transport.
No,
everyone.
the length overall can be long,
Yeah.
and so you have the draft of 2 meters below and 2 meters above,
Okay, but what if it can be?
and 10 meters wide. So it can be long, and you can have
So
several
you can actually
barges.
have a lot of cargo. On
Yeah,
board.
and you can have a lot of them,
Yes.
because capacity problem there is none. So the available space in the infrastructure is plenty enough.
Yes.
But I guess the approach must be very case specific. I mean,
Yes.
You can talk about this for Amsterdam, for I don't know, Venice,
Yes.
St. Petersburg, I don't know, Gothenburg, but not Athens probably.
No. So the interesting is to find the cases that have this, where you have the big terminals for the big shipper companies or shipping companies, not shipping companies, but for instance, the third-party logistics providers like DHL and Schenker, for instance, where these are located close to urban waterways today. And you have the city with the preconditions that you can deliver some of the goods. For instance, Copenhagen, Aalborg, for instance, and Göteborg and Stockholm, definitely. There you have a few in our vicinity here that could be very suitable. So, but then there is a definition. What is the urban waterway? Is it that the city has a city front towards the sea, or is it that you actually have rivers that you are relatively calm, or is it inland waterways, or are you going to get into trouble that is the exposed shoreline? Then it's not going to be as easy. So, yeah.
I once heard a talk by one of our colleagues who's from the US, and he said, in US, you always move forward, you never go back to some old-fashioned technology. It seems to be somehow the same here in Europe, that we left the barges many years ago, and we have basically made it impossible to go back to this technology, because in the meantime we have built the bridges too low and everything. So people would prefer to invest money in drones, where you are flying instead of using drones.
We have to comment on our American colleagues. We had a conference last week where this exact picture was shown. The presentation before had a few of our American colleagues going through about how they now supplied a grocery market with urban waterways. And they said, this is the first in the world. This is the first time ever somebody has delivered groceries by using sea. And it was an interesting discussion after this presentation was held, or this picture was shown by my colleague. Because, of course, we had people from Utrecht there who said, but, and we had one representative from France who said exactly this about the front bricks, and the Americans was...
What city was it?
It was from Utrecht and from France. No, New York. Yeah, so we're the first in the world.
Okay,
It was
so as
very
long as-
American.
As long as they don't know that anybody
Exactly.
has moved forward, they are moving forward. But do you think we could have waterway drones? But this could be...
Our discussion here is that these would be autonomous vehicles. If we were to design one, for instance, for the waste transport here, an autonomous vehicle has been mentioned that is very suitable. So if you would have autonomous barges, because you have very little, if we looked on this on the map here, you have very little, we can look on this one or that one, you have very little interaction with other traffic here on this small river. Basically none. Kayaks. So it has to be avoided. And that's a very little challenge for an autonomous vehicle today. So very suitable.
Maybe I can ask on that as well. Because like here in Copenhagen, the waterways, if you take the channel here, they're being taken over by the general population as well. You have those boats you can rent out, and you have a lot of tipsy drivers sailing around. So that will create traffic on the motorway, on the waterway anyway. So if you take some of the works from the Netherlands, they're looking into doing deliveries at night.
Yeah.
But is that something you're taking into account?
For instance, the waste handling here, and that's a problem you have when you have city distribution. It's not possible to gather your waste during the night. It would be very suitable. But if you empty your glass containers at 3 o'clock in the morning, that won't be popular for the first time. You will notice it and wonder what happened now when you wake up, and the next time you'll be mad. So that's the typical with waste disposal in cities. It's not popular to do it at night. Goods delivery, problem is that there has to be, generally somebody has to accept the goods. Trouble again, expensive. So it's not going to happen. So with the barges, you can deliver the barges and put them where they're supposed to be for to unload and load them during night. So you can put them in the context where they should be. So you can have the travel by night, but once again, congestion during daytime, no. And for now, I'm a very active boater myself, but not now. Then I travel abroad. So it's not going to be a problem. During the summer months, everything goes crazy anyway. So bigger problems then, but for the rest of the year, no.
Any more questions? Then let's thank the speaker again.
Thank you.